You're watching Capitol View, Sunday morning talk focused on the political scene in Arkansas.
Issue 2 will be on your November ballot. It's a legislative referred measure that will change the threshold for passage of citizen-led initiated acts and both citizen-led and legislative referred constitutional amendments to 60%. Should you vote for or against? Issue 2, that's the question we're going to debate with Representative David Ray, Republican of Maumelle, chief advocate for the measure, and Bill Kopsky with the Arkansas Public Policy Panel. You are a chief opponent of the measure. So welcome you both to being here. I appreciate you coming to talk about this. David, you were the primary sponsor of Issue 2. You helped navigate it through the legislature. Tell me why this is good public policy.
So Issue 2 is the name for the Constitutional Amendment and Initiative Reform Amendment that'll be on the ballot in November. And what it would do is simply raise the threshold for passage of these measures from a bare majority, 50% plus one, up to 60% in order to ensure that there's a genuine consensus among voters when we take the step of amending our state constitution or passing an initiated act. That's important for a couple of reasons. Yeah. First of all, it shouldn't be easy to amend our state constitution, and we shouldn't do it in sort of a willy-nilly fashion. You know, our federal constitution, which we all love and revere, has only been amended 27 times in the history of our country. And our state constitution, which has been around a lot less years than that, has been amended well over 100 times and counting. Aside from that, this process leaves us susceptible to big money, out-of-state interests that want to hijack our lenient ballot access laws and essentially buy an amendment to our state constitution.
We'll dive into those arguments. I want to hear why you think it's bad public policy, Bill.
Well, you know, look, we all want the freedom to make decisions on the issues that affect our lives, and Issue 2 takes a constitutional right to have the freedom to make those choices and makes it much harder. And so fundamentally, that's what it's all about. Some politicians and big special interests are attempting to rewrite the rules to make it more difficult for citizens to have a say in the decisions that affect our lives. And we think it's wrong.
David, you mentioned the fact that you don't want people to be able to buy their way into this ballot access. This 50% plus one is a low threshold. There needs to be bigger consensus than that. But I think that if you change it to 60%, the amount of money it's going to take to win that type of consensus could actually make it to where only people with really deep pockets even try to move that. Is that not an argument that compels you?
No, I think what it'll do is it'll ensure that more issues that are put forward are things that can actually achieve genuine consensus among voters. You know, good ideas are still going to be able to pass at 60%, just like they can at 50%. You know, the supermajority threshold of 2/3 would be much harder, but 60%, you know, there's plenty of things that achieve 60%. And so
have we had any ballot initiatives that have achieved 60%? I want to say maybe the minimum wage a couple of years ago might have been the only one. I can't remember what it was.
No, in recent history, about half of those that pass end up hitting the 60% threshold, I think, if I'm remembering correctly. But, you know, good ideas that people get out and advocate for are still going to be able to pass. What this would do is it would prevent something from just squeaking by with just over 50% after a misleading ad campaign, a misleading ballot title, and then being cemented into the state constitution forever and ever and being impossible to change.
Bill, why not make it harder to change something?
Yeah, I mean, look, we live in a democracy where majority, in Arkansas, I've always learned that simple majority is 50% plus one. What Issue 2 would do is allow a 40% minority to block citizens from being able to make progress on issues that are important to them. You want to talk about building consensus, you know, it is incredibly difficult already. There's all kinds of rules and regulations that restrict how you go about qualifying an issue. Then it's even harder to convince voters to actually support a measure. At the end of the day, we trust Arkansas voters to make those decisions based on the information that they have, and limiting it so that only a 40% minority can block. I mean, that's not democracy as we know it. And the final thing I'd say is about building consensus. Arkansas has a problem with building consensus because we have the lowest voter turnout in the country. We should solve that problem. And that would bring a lot more voters into the process. But what this does is it raises more barriers to voting, and it's just the wrong way to go.
No, this doesn't raise barriers to voting at all. That's simply not true. This doesn't change any of the rules for ballot access and what you would have to do to get a measure on the ballot. Look, our federal Constitution you can't amend with just a simple majority vote. Our Constitution is our charter document for the state. It shouldn't read like a book of statutes that's amended 3 or 4 or 5 times every election cycle. That's how you end up like California, a state that's basically become ungovernable because they have to vote on a dozen or 14 or 16 ballot measures every 2 years.
Well, but let's be clear.
That's no way to run a state.
Well, but let's be clear. This issue 2 does not just affect constitutional amendments. It also affects initiated acts, which is the people's right to make policy. And the other key point here is that with issue 2, the people have the right now, they've used it for over 100 years to amend the Constitution, to pass laws. It's how the people of Arkansas have adjusted to the times. My friend here, Representative Ray, wants to take us to Washington, D.C. style politics. That seems like the wrong way for us to go in Arkansas. I've not seen many state legislators stand up and say we should do what they do in Washington, D.C., and that's absolutely the wrong way. What we've done in Arkansas has worked for 100 years, and we need to keep it the way it is.
That's more than a little misleading, Bill, but that's okay. Look, the right of the people to pass issues at the ballot is going to remain fully in effect. It's going to continue. Keep in mind, this applies equally to both legislatively referred and citizen-initiated amendments. I thought it was important that it apply equally to both. In my view, this actually gives people something of a check on the legislature, more of a check than they have currently, because if you look throughout modern history, the majority of constitutional amendments are referred out by the legislature. And this was something that I had in mind when I drafted this, because part of the reason I ran for office was because I didn't like a lot of the things that the legislature was referring out, whether it's sales taxes put into our Constitution forever and ever, or whether it was the so-called ethics amendment written by a state senator that's now in federal prison. You know, these are things that my amendment would allow voters to have a greater check on the legislature with.
Yeah. The check on the legislators is the electorate. It goes to the vote. Again, we trust voters to make these decisions. I don't know why we would say we don't trust voters enough, and we're going to allow only 40% of them to block progress. That's, again, we trust voters to make these decisions,
well, I think
that's the check.
I think you would acknowledge, though, that a lot of times voters are misled by deceptive or misleading ballot titles. They're also misled by big money, out-of-state special interests that come in and spend a boatload of money just before an election to temporarily convince people that something's a good idea. And then once it's passed by just maybe even less than 1% a passage, it's impossible to fix going forward. It creates a perpetual problem that the state can't solve because it's virtually impossible to change the Constitution once that's happened.
Sadly, big money is a part of American politics. If you want to look at big outside money pouring into state legislative races, into all of our federal races in Arkansas, it's a problem that we have, and we would love to help tackle that problem.
Well, this tries to insulate our Constitution, our state Constitution, which is our charter document, from that influence.
Well, but it doesn't.
I got
It's
one more
affecting,
question,
it's
and we got 30
affecting
seconds
the whole.
left in here. So let me just ask
yeah,
this.
sure.
Why not change that 60% threshold to bills passing in the state legislature? If it's good for citizen-led initiated acts, why not do it in the state legislature or electing people to office?
Well, there's plenty of things in the state legislature that do require more than a simple majority support, but there's also a lot of layers of accountability built into that process. You know, bills have to go through a House committee, they have to go through a Senate committee, they have to be voted on by both chambers.
Fair point.
The governor has to sign it or veto it. There's a lot of steps in that process that are much more.
All right, I got 15 seconds. You get the last word.
There are all those same checks or similar checks in the initiated act process. You have to follow all the rules to qualify enough signatures. It has to pass constitutional muster with the courts.
You just have to buy the signatures.
Absolutely not. There's so many restrictions on how to collect those signatures. That's just absolutely blatantly false, and I think you know that.
No.
We got to end it there, but we can continue this conversation through the commercial break. Y'all will miss it all. So, but it'll be fun. David Ray, Bill Kopsky, thank you very much for being here.